Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Tales of a TC. I am joined by my beautiful co-host, Ella Ray.
Hi, how are you? You're so sweet. I love you.
And today we are kind of discussing a hotbed problem in the community, and that is second lien position lenders. And we really want to go over it from A to Z, how that looks for those lenders and how to identify good borrowers and how to work with TCs and just all of the kind of little pieces to ensure that everybody is set up to win in the end.
100%. Yeah, because it's all about the things that you don't know. So we just want to shed light on some of those items and make everyone aware, that when these things pop up, it's probably something that you need to dig into a little further. So
100%. So one of the things I really want to stress, and this should be for lenders everywhere, is when someone brings you a deal, make sure you get all of the information. Make sure you're looking at a purchase agreement. Make sure you're looking at a mortgage statement. Make sure you understand the transaction because essentially you're coming in as a partner on the transaction.
absolutely. I was just going to say, I think a lot of this, and I actually had an instance like this yesterday where they were like, well, the title company has somebody who's just going to do the transaction. And this was a subto and there was no lending on it, at least not yet. But I think it's important to note that a lot of the things that we do, most title companies aren't going to do. They're not going to go into somebody's mortgage portal. They're not going to analyze their escrow account. They're not going to make sure that what you signed on the dotted line for is actually what you're getting. So a lot of due diligence goes in on our side too, especially, and even more so when it comes to having lenders come into these deals.
100%. And I think that it's really important because and I know that you and I were just talking about this before we started, but you and I have both seen where buyers are coming into these properties and they're getting people to lend to them without us ever knowing. So the money's showing up at title, but the lender might not be secured appropriately. And so they're feeling this warm and fuzzy because they have a TC on the transaction, but really the TC doesn't even know they exist.
I can't even tell you how many times that's happened, where I didn't even realize that there was somebody else on the transaction that was going to be funding it until, maybe I had a phone call with title and they mentioned something, but the buyers never said anything to me. So I think, even as TCs, we take these little lessons that we learn and we implement new procedures and new systems and put those in place to kind of cover ourselves later on whenever that does happen. Because oftentimes it's just somebody calling into title, hey, where do I wire this money to? And it's like, who are you? Oh, I'm the lender on this. Oh, really? Yeah, lending, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're not aware of. So we're not able to properly secure them if there is no other TC on it.
100%. And so part of the due diligence as a lender is to make sure that you're getting that promissory note and you're getting the security instrument and you're seeing a title report. You're having communication with the TC, with the title company to ensure that they're getting lender's insurance. There's a crazy amount of, and this is like not even a bad buyer, there's a crazy amount of fraud going on in real estate right now that if you don't have lender's insurance, you're not covered if the seller is not actually the seller on that property, which is happening so much in the land space that people are signing for properties they don't own. And it's really imperative that those pieces are in place to protect the lender.
They absolutely are. And those are things that, especially as a newer lender, they might not know. It sounds great. Oh, yeah, 20% in 2 months and flat, not even annualized, right? So, oh, yeah, take my money. Like, they're not asking any questions. They're just so, shiny object, like, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money by lending for such a short period of time. And they don't understand that there's a lot that goes into place to secure that money. It's not just a promissory note. A promissory note doesn't work by itself. It works in tandem with either a deed of trust or a mortgage. and making sure that that document, that deed of trust or that mortgage is recorded on the property, because I have seen title companies that haven't recorded it. And then if someone else places a lien on the property and that mortgage that you lent on wasn't recorded, like now your position is not secured. What could have been a second position is now a third. So there's a lot that goes into this that I don't really think newer lenders understand. And it's unfortunate because they're very quick to, give people money on deals that aren't even viable deals, especially these low equity deals where there is nothing to secure them and they're not cross collateralized. So there's a lot that goes on here. It's scary.
100%. And the other thing I really want to stress is quality documents. So you want to ensure that an attorney is drafting the documents and that there's a personal guarantee. I have personally seen investors that do not care and will burn through an LLC. Just recently, I had someone tell me they had an unrealistic balloon on a property. And I was discussing with them, like, how are you even going to get out of this balloon in 2 years? And their response was, I'll take the cash flow for the next 2 years. And then if it defaults, it defaults. I'll just give the property back. So,
Wow.
because everyone hides behind these entities and they're
Yeah.
not taking any personal warranty that they're going to repay these funds, or like at the end of the day, when you're a lender, I have a very dear friend of mine that lent a lot of money in multiple second position loans and didn't set them up appropriately. I met her after she had already lent her funds out, and every single one of those investors did not care. When it came back to she's paying fees for taking money out of her IRA, and she's had multiple deals that she's not getting any of this money back. The investors didn't care because they had no skin in the game. I had one of them actually deeded the property back to the seller with her lien on the property, which goes back to your and my conversation on you can't just deed back a property to a seller because there's probably additional things that are on the property at this point.
100%. You're absolutely right. That's that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, because this is happening without, and honestly, it kills me when people are like, oh, whatever you charge for a PML deal. I think it's in the range of, like, let's say, I don't know, 1,000 to, I don't know, 1,500, who knows what the range is. But that's too expensive to bring a TC on, but you're willing to lose 60, 70, $100,000, and that's okay. I mean, why wouldn't you want to be protected if you had somebody who knew all the things that you don't know, who knows the questions to ask? I've had people bring me on PML deals and I'm asking them these questions and they're like, "Oh, I didn't think about that." Or that's a really good question to ask, or let me find out, or let me ask them to see that current mortgage statement, or they're not asking any of that. Like, let me ask about this cross collateralized property that, somebody, the borrower was he was just so excited to lend on this deal. I'm sorry, that he was so excited to borrow on this deal. And he's like, yeah, I have this cross collateralized property and it's here. And it's one of our residents and it was in 2 states. So we had one in Tennessee and like one in Virginia, and he was cross collateralizing the one in Virginia. And I'm looking, I get hired to do this, and I'm looking through the title commitment, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. There's a $400,000 IRS lien on this property. You can't use this as cross collateral. There's nothing here. And the lender wouldn't have known that if there wasn't someone actually who put eyes on these things and who knew what to look out for. So it's, in the long run, like it's not expensive. It might seem expensive, but the amount of money that you can save by using a TC is priceless. Why not spend that $1,000 at $1,500? You're going to be upset later if you don't do it. And you're going to be asking, why didn't I hire a TC when I did this deal? because we're able to kind of like say, hey, watch it if you go this way because there's a wall there. You don't want to hit that wall. So, it's important for investors to use, especially beginner borrowers, to use a TC. Like, don't even skimp on it, and make sure that it's somebody who understands and has your best interest in mind, and not just some random TC that maybe was working with the borrower and has no intentions of like really disclosing anything, right? Because I think it's important. And as TCs, we want to make sure that we're working for everyone's benefit, right? But let's say there's a TC on the file and it's like a real estate TC, like a traditional real estate TC who's not really worried about that kind of stuff. And the borrower is like, oh yeah, I have a TC on the deal. It's the realtor's TC. That TC is not going to be looking out for that, So get somebody who's trained and preferably top tier trained, that knows to look out for these things.
And has the standards you want met.
Yeah.
I will not work a file that lenders aren't secured, that there's not personal guarantees, that there's not open communication with everybody. There are other people that will. And so it is vital that you interview and have a conversation with that person to ensure that they do care that everybody's needs are met. Because some of it, they're only going to cover the person that's paying the bill. And if that person says, we're going to create a deed of trust, but we're not going to record it, they'll be like, okay. And I know that you and I don't exactly operate in that style.
No, definitely not. And it's also something I think a lot of TCs are probably not in the, well, no, I'm not going to say a lot. I'm going to say certain TCs are not in the habit of getting those recorded docs and checking back with title to make sure that those things were recorded. Because, I mean, let's face it, everybody's human, right? Maybe they missed it. Maybe they forgot to. Maybe that day they had something else going on and they didn't file it. You always want to make sure that your instruments are recorded. Even if the transaction is closed, because this happens after the transaction closes, to be a TC who's going to go and make sure that everything is the way that it's supposed to be, right? That the file is actually closed, that the deed is recorded, that the deed of trust, that the mortgage is recorded, that everybody has their copies and everybody knows like they have access to their files. So we have a lot to do even once we close the deal, so making sure that your TC is thorough and follows through and short, right?
We had a regular warranty deed one time that we had to get, it was a wet sign state. We had to get redone 3 times. The sellers were in Germany because it kept getting lost somewhere between title and the county. But if we weren't following up, because title doesn't go back and check and make sure that those things are recorded, and great if they can e-file. That's amazing. I love those title companies. All of them can. And so it is imperative to make sure you have those. The other issue, and I'm just going to say this because this is going to help somebody someday, and it's the Band-Aid off. If you're lending in a second lien position, you need to know everything about that property at all times. And this is even if you're a private money partner, okay? So you're jumping in on somebody else's LLC. We can have a different conversation someday
about that. Yeah.
But so let's just say that you're going to do that. You need to make sure that that first lien position is paid on time, because if they foreclose, you lose everything. Especially in today's market, even if you had a lot of equity in the property, the reality is that foreclosure auctions are not going how everyone thinks they should go. And the equity is just sitting in these properties with the bank. And so I have recently ran into a couple private money partners or second lien position holders that say, like, I don't have the money to pay for the first lien mortgage. I don't want to manage the property. I don't want to take this over. And so second lien positions are the exact same as first lien positions. You need to lend to own. You need to know that if something, and this could be, God forbid, catastrophic. I saw a post recently about someone talking about how a borrower passed away on them. You have to be able to step in. You have to authorization to speak to the mortgage company. You need to know who the mortgage company is. You need to have the seller's contact information. So if you need something, you know where to go. You have to have all of these pieces of information because that deal is just as much yours as the lender as it is the borrower's.
Absolutely. And that's why they always say loan to own, right? You want to make sure that if all else fails, you're ready to own that property. And that requires having the proper documents in place, the POA, the third party authorization, the portal information to be able to check. Like there has to be an open line of communication. They need to be able to see, okay, is this mortgage getting paid on time? And, that's very important. And I don't think that that's something that a lot of second position lenders are asking for. And I don't think that a lot of TCs have the foresight like you and I to be able to put those documents in place for that second position lender to say, okay, well, here, you're also protected because if God forbid you end up needing these, here they are. Right. And I wanted to say something else that I think is very important to note, because I've come across this situation, unfortunately, quite a few times, both on the seller side and, on sometime. I mean, I've had some second positions that didn't go as planned. And they're like, what do I do now? Just understand that there is protocol in those promissory notes and mortgages or deeds of trust. There's protocol that if there's defaults, it tells you exactly what to do. So sending notices, right? Notice to cure, a cure period. What happens then? It's all in the documents. But I don't think people know that. And they're just like, well, I need a foreclosure attorney. And yes, it's great to get one of those, but you got to start the process, right? The sooner you start the process, the easier it is for you to start, get your money back, get your deed in lieu signed, or end up having to foreclose, which ideally is not what we want to do. But just to know that, I don't think a lot of people read these documents.
They don't.
So it's definitely there. It's written in black and white, and you have the ability to initiate that process if you need to.
And the
And I think that's
moment
important.
there's default, like we always have it included that if like they miss a payment on the first lien mortgage, that constitutes default on the second.
On the second, yeah, that's important.
And the day that happens, you have to act. There is no, this is business. You can be the friendliest of friends with anyone you want. And if you want to do a written arrangement to adjust, absolutely. But make sure that that follow on default is there. You want to give them an extra 10 days? Great. Do an addendum. We're going to do an extra 10 days for this payment. At the 11th day, you'll get a cure notice and we'll start default policies.
Yeah, absolutely.
What happens is you and I are coming across people that they have 6 months of default. Now everything's $50,000 behind and they don't know what to do.
And then at that point, I mean, let's say there's not a second position lender. Let's say it's the seller at this point trying to get their property back. You're gonna stick them with like 6 months of mortgage payments that they're more than likely not going to be able to pay off. Why do that? Why not just be open and transparent? Like, hey, I missed a payment this month, or start that conversation, but let people know. You don't just default and then wait for it to like completely snowball and everybody's caught in this avalanche and they have no idea what to do or where to go. So I think that's something that needs to be spoken of more often, and maybe we'll do something more at length about that. But it's unfortunate to see that, and I think when we're as investors, we need to make sure that everybody is protected. Our lenders, our borrowers, our sellers, our buyers, like everybody needs to be protected in these transactions. Which again, bring it back full circle. This is why it's important to have a TC that knows what they're doing on these files. How many transactions haven't you gotten where they come back to you and they're like, well, I never got a power of attorney, or I never got a third party authorization, or I don't know where the seller is. And I'm just like, okay, we're gonna have to work through this because this is important. You need to know this stuff. Oh, I didn't have a promissory note and a deed of trust, and now the seller's saying that I committed fraud and they didn't sell me their house. you know the problems are boundless. There is no way, like, we could sit here for hours and talk about all the problems that we've come across, and it wouldn't even skim the surface. So have somebody who knows what they're doing to be able to protect you as much as possible and mitigate as much as possible, because it's like the wild west in some respects.
And I really want to stress that even if you've closed, if you're seeing this after the fact and you need to put all of those systems in place, you need to protect your lenders. You're a lender and you need to get protected. Reach out. Like, we
Yeah.
retroactively help people all the time. And I'd rather it before the avalanche. Like, let's go ask the questions, get the information. There's plenty of people that I work with that we go back to. They'll work, it'll be their first subto. They worked with a wholesaler that has a TC. Sometimes they're just pocketing that extra TC fee.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
And
Oh, that one. Let's not get started on that one.
And then they're just, there's no documents, there's no contact with the seller. And you are willing to dig in and help them find all those pieces as best we can to make sure that everyone has a good solution going forward. That solution might be, I recently, I worked her second subto with her and she closed her first one without a TC. And the first transaction, she had nothing. She didn't even have a mortgage statement.
Oh my gosh.
So she hired me retroactively, and we got a hold of the seller who refused to give over the portal information, but she did agree to give the account number. So we are able, payments have to go through over the phone. And now she has lines of communication with the seller, and it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
So we can help the best we can. We can help if you're facing default, we have attorneys in place that can help you with your cure notice, with those things. And I want to go back to, if you're a lender, if you use a good servicing company, the moment there is default, they send a cure notice. They start that process for you.
Yeah, that's important. Although a lot of people end up not wanting to for whatever reason. I mean, $20, $30 at the end of the day, it's almost like not hiring a TC because you don't want to pay that money. But you pay that $20, $30 for peace of mind, right? You don't have to deal with those communications. You don't have to deal with like, oh, is there a default or not? But one of the things that you mentioned, and I think it doesn't get talked about enough, is if you're buying a property that was bought on a subto, you better be sure that you have contact with that seller and get those documents re-signed, that power of attorney, that third-party authorization, because you're still going to need that even as the second subto buyer, even more so as the second subto buyer. So, that's also something that I see happening a lot. And I'm like, does the original seller know you're selling this house? Because you need to get in contact with them. Oh, no, they don't know. Or, okay, well, we're going to have a conversation, because we can't complete this transaction without them knowing and without them re-signing these documents. It's just a conversation, one of those hard conversations, but it has to be had.
Agreed. I think we'll do our next episode all on undoing and redoing subtos. All right. Well, Ella, thank you so much for today. I think that
Yes, thank you.
Hopefully everyone kind of understands better how to proceed forward safely when you're lending on subtos. Do you have anything to
If you don't, feel free to contact us and we'll help you and we'll guide you and we'll make sure that you catch all the blind spots before you walk into these deals. So
100%. Let's make sure everyone gets taken care of.
yes.
All right.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.